So this evening, with a croaky voice, I am inviting Kynan to take the teacher's seat and to offer Teisho. Kynan, I think, has been walking the way together with me for 16, 17, some number of cycles, and is clear-eyed and impassioned person of the way. I cannot recommend him more heartily than that.
So I've given tonight's talk a name, which I haven't actually done before, but I thought it might be fun tonight. And the name is, "What a Dangerous Place You're Sitting In."
You haven't told me.
Just checking for danger. And I've taken this name from a lovely case in Entangling Vines, one of the koan collections that we're lucky enough to have in our tradition. And I thought I'll give you the case in full. It's not extraordinarily long, but there's some beautiful, beautiful details in there that I'd like to just take up step at a time in tonight's talk. So it's case 215 of Entangling Vines. And here it is. Bai Juyi, who was the provincial governor, said to the priest, Yoke Daolin, "What a dangerous place you're sitting in." "What danger am I in?" said Nyoke, the priest. "The governor's danger is far greater." "I govern this land," said the governor. "What danger could I be in?" Nyoke answered, "Passions burn. The intellect never rests. What could be more dangerous than that?" The governor then asked, "What is the central teaching of the Buddha Dharma?" And Nyoke said, "As for doing evil, avoid it. As for the good, practice sharing it." "Even a 3-year-old child could have told me that," replied the governor. "Ah, even a 3-year-old child can say it," said the priest. "But even an 80-year-old cannot practice it." Bai Juyi, the governor, bowed and departed. That's the case. So, like Ross, perhaps sit comfortably or as dangerously as you'd like.
Kim, you speak up a little. I've got a very blocked ear.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear? Yeah.
It's just my blocked ear.
So it's funny sitting here actually thinking about what a dangerous place we're sitting in when it is clearly extraordinarily beautiful. We've got manicured gardens and polished floorboards, even down to hand-knitted dishcloths. It hardly feels extraordinarily dangerous. And yet this could be the last breath we ever breathe. And this could be the last day we ever get to enjoy. And not just could be, this is actually the last day of our lives. The last one great, complete day that we share with the many beings. And I became aware as I was putting some of these thoughts together for this talk that a lot of this was inspired by a kind of worry that I have about our one great day that we share with the many beings. It's a worry about all the unique and pressing and sometimes seemingly insoluble problems that we see in our world right now. And that's everything from the kind of debased politics that swirl around us every day in the newspapers and on television. Certainly in the degrading social media that permeates just about every corner of our lives. Not to mention the accelerating environmental collapse that we are witness to every day, day in, day out. And I have 2 young children who will be inheriting this world, stepping into this dangerous, complex, and yet beautiful place. And this, of course, is where we sit. We come here to gather, not just in this dojo, we sit on the point of this needle, of this swirling, unknown, damaged, glorious world. So it's a dangerous place indeed, where we sit on this earth. So tonight, with this case in mind that I read you before, I want to ask this question. Can we discover complete fit and refuge in exactly this dangerous place? Can we admit that it is the only place we have and that our refuge is discovered only there? Only here. So in the case, you probably would have picked up that there are 2 very interesting different characters coming together, meeting face to face. One of them is a governor who perhaps is a sort of representative for worldly things, the secular, the political, that sort of world. And the other is a priest, another emblem in his way of the sacred, of the spiritual, if you like. And I love that these 2 come together here in this case. We start to enjoy an interweaving that takes place. Always a good dialogue between secular or sacred and profane, the best kind of dialogue. So from the get-go, our governor gives us his opening gambit. What a dangerous place you're sitting in, he says. So what's he on about here? Why does he offer this challenge to the priest? Now, it could be that he's pointing to the priest's vulnerability. This is 9th century China, when there was all sorts of upheaval and persecution even. So perhaps the governor is saying, you're completely unprotected in this place. You probably rely in some measure on state support or funds. You're at the mercy of the world. What a dangerous place you're sitting in. It's quite possible that is part of what's going on here. Because Bai Juyi was not just the governor of this particular region, he was also one of China's most famous poets. And anybody who's indulged Arthur Waley's translations of, he's got that beautiful collection, 170 Chinese poems. Do you know that collection? Arthur Waley loves Bai Juyi so much he dedicates an entire chapter. He's the one poet singled out to be lauded in Arthur Waley's collection. Very interesting. So he was no stranger to appreciation and rank and the perks that might come with that. And even more than being just the possibly the most famous poet in China, he was also in, I think it was 841, elevated to the rank of, I actually have to check that, what was it called again? It's got a great name. President of the Board of War. So this is a man who, interesting man. And so a question like this, what a dangerous place you're sitting in, is loaded with all sorts of worldly experience. But actually, I think he's saying what a dangerous place you're sitting in, because our priest, Naoke, even though he had a temple that was assigned to him, decided that that wasn't quite rustic enough. And he would rather sit in a tall old pine tree with spreading branches. That's where Naoke sat. That's where he lived. That was his home. So I imagine this encounter actually happening up in the cubby of this place. What a dangerous place you're sitting in. And we know that he sat in this tree because Naoke actually translates as the priest's nickname, which is bird nest. He was renowned for this eccentric behaviour of sitting up in the tree, up in his nest, completely at home, exposed to the world, exposed and at home in vulnerability. Here is where our encounter takes place. So in response to the governor's words of what a dangerous place you're sitting in, the priest, it's almost like he just shrugs a little bit. He's cool. He just says, he says, what danger am I in? It's a good question. And he immediately throws it back to the governor. The governor's danger is far greater. And the governor replies, what danger could I be in? I govern this land. And I think we can get a feel for the type in that response. This is somebody who feels protected and fortified by rank, fortified by their position in the world. A dangerous place, actually, to think such things. Yeah, because it's as if he's saying, what could ever happen to me with such power and influence and protection from my wealth and my associations, etc.? What could ever happen to me? And our priest tells him what could happen. Passions burn. The intellect never rests. What could be more dangerous than that? And this is true danger. The true danger of being a human being, which not even the governor can escape. Because as we all know, we've all strolled through this life. We know how dangerous life is. And it's interesting that, I find this interesting that so many of the words that we use in Zen are actually linked to this sense of risk and danger. For instance, we talk about experiencing things so much in Zen. Well, experience comes from the Latin that means to undergo, to endure, to suffer. I think the word is expirere. I don't speak Latin. And feel is another word. Feel is another word that through Latin gets traced back to things like risk, danger. Just to feel. all of this points, I think, to how precarious our life is and how necessarily precarious it is. Just to feel life, just to exist at all, is risky business. And I think one of the risks that we take is if we open ourselves up to the world, we open ourselves up to being touched by the world. This is one of my favourite images, probably one of the most dangerous images we have in our tradition, of when Shakyamuni, when he moves to affirm his own realisation, in order to do so, touches the earth. And in that move is simultaneously touched by the earth. The division between self and other is healed in that act. That's what he risked doing. That was the great danger he put himself in, and that we put ourselves in this room. So this is the kind of healing that danger affords when we willingly embrace it, when we accept that this is what's at play in our practice and in our lives. And by suffering with others, if we can suffer with others, we are touching others and we are touched by them in return. And when that happens, as with Shakyamuni touching the earth, that is when our seamless reality is restored. Restored at last, because it was ever thus. But realising it is truly a gift. And it's good, I think, to take old bird nests words to heart when he says, passions burn, the intellect never rests. He's not actually recommending that we somehow quell the passions or eradicate the intellect or deny the intellect. He's telling us that this is the human condition, and he wants us to see the true nature of the passions, the true nature of the intellect. A very different move to what sometimes is assumed of Zen and assumed of Buddhism more broadly. I actually think the governor is touched by this, by this provocation of bird nest. Because he then makes a very different move. He asks a very different kind of question in the light of what the priest has just offered him. I think the brashness is somehow gone when he turns and says, it's almost like a plea, I think. He turns to Nyoke and says, suddenly, what is the central teaching of the Buddha Dharma? A much more humble sounding question, I think. And that's when Nyoke offers these exquisitely beautiful lines that I love. When he says, as for doing evil, avoid it. As for the good, practice sharing it. And you might recognise that these are a version of the 3 pure precepts, which we have in our Jukai ceremony. And anybody who's been through Jukai has worked with them already. The 3 pure precepts of, I vow to maintain the precepts, I vow to practice all good dharmas, and I vow to save the many beings. All of these are at play in this version of them by the priest. And I want to examine this a little bit more closely now. Because he uses the word evil, which is not something that we encounter very often in our tradition. It certainly appears, and when it does, as it did in the Shodoka today, it is always worth paying close attention and looking deeply into this matter of what might be referred to here in this word evil. So I want to risk looking at what evil might be and how perhaps we work with it and grow with it, heal with it, in fact. And to do that, I want to pick up on an author who I can't even call him an author, he's more than an author, by this incredible man called Varlam Shalamov. I don't know if anybody's ever encountered this fella. I came across it quite by accident. He was a Russian prisoner, arrested in 1929 and forced to work in the Siberian gulags, where he stayed for 17 years. And we know, as a probably conservative estimate, that 3 million people plus died in those camps. They were just human garbage dumps. And somehow, miraculously, this Shalamov survived, both physically and spiritually. And even Solzhenitsyn, who is one of the famous people writing about the Gulag, said, Shalamov is the one that can tell this story, not I. So I've been reading some of his tales. They're all short. They're little memories, sketches, encounters that he has or had in that time. And I find them so intriguing because he seems to have mastered somehow a way of not picking and choosing his steps through that life. We talked, or Susan mentioned the other night, of practicing this not that way, not that way. Somehow Shalamov intuited that he would have to, in an impossible situation, embrace that impossible situation. Be as impossible as the situation itself. And he did this with a kind of honesty and lucidity that I just find astonishing. I just think I'm still not sure what to make of it. It's mind-blowing. And you can hear this quality of character just in the way he writes, just in the simplest phrases. And you really hear that he doesn't try to do anything. Remember, Nyoke says, as for doing evil, simply avoid it. Well, Shalamov here manages somehow not to do his life. It's not a passive surrender. It's so engaged, but it's so fine-grained and nuanced. It is really something to behold. And there's one story that I'll just read you a little bit of. It's called Dominos. So the lead-up, or the setup for the story, is that he's been working in the gold mines. He is so ill, he's so impoverished and starving that he's been taken to the camp hospital. He can't walk, he can't see, he can't talk. He's just a skeleton with skin on it. And there happens to be a camp doctor. There was always a camp doctor, but this particular one, called Andrei Mikhailovich, was unusually kind, actually. A strangely compassionate man for these camps. Usually they were weird distortions of human beings in there too. And Shalamov is told by this doctor that he needs to rest. And the doctor gives him 2 months to recuperate some strength by being fed some thin soup and the odd piece of bread, whatever the camp can actually lay its hands on to support him. And slowly, he does begin to recover some strength in this hospital ward. And one night he's woken by an orderly with the words, The doctor, Andrei Mihailovich, wants to see you. Kozlik here will show you the way. Kozlik's another patient in the ward, and he leads Shalamov to the doctor's private room. And Shalamov goes inside, and the doctor says, "So do you feel like playing dominoes?" And Shalamov says, "Okay." Secretly he's thinking, "I hate dominoes. It is such a stupid game." But he sits down with the doctor and they begin to play dominoes, and they play it actually on the doctor's clean bed, clean linen on the bed with a clean pillow that Shalamov marvels at. He hasn't seen such a thing for what feels like forever. And he's also offered some food. He's offered some bread, some tea, strong tea. I think he has about 10 cups of tea. And some kasha, traditional Russian fuel, all of which are just unheard of luxuries for this guy. And in fact, he says, "I had not seen sugar for several years. I felt warm." It's just amazing. So I'll read you just the last part of the story. Just indulge me here, because I'd love to cut it a little bit short. It's not too long, but I'd love to cut it shorter. But you need to get a sense of just how this man walks and encounters such a dangerous place, how he lives with it, the complexities of it. "So you won," Andrei Mihailovich said. "Congratulations. For a prize, I present you with this." He took from the night table a plastic cigarette case. "You probably haven't smoked for a long time," he said. He tore off a piece of newspaper and rolled a cigarette. "There's nothing better than newspaper for homegrown tobacco. The traces of typographic ink not only don't spoil the bouquet of the homegrown tobacco, but even heighten it in the best fashion." I touched a piece of paper to the glowing coals on the stove and lit up, greedily inhaling the nauseatingly sweet smoke. It was really tough to lay your hands on tobacco, and I should have quit smoking long ago. But even though the conditions were what might be called appropriate, nothing like a gulag for quitting cigarettes, I never did quit. It was terrible even to imagine that I could lose sight of this single great convict joy. "Good night," Andrei Mihailovich said, smiling. "I was going to go to bed, but I so wanted to play a game. I really appreciate it." I walked out of his room into the dark corridor and found someone standing in my path near the wall. I recognised Kozlik's silhouette. "It's you. What are you doing here?" "I wanted a smoke. Did he give you any?" I was ashamed of my greed. Ashamed that I had not thought of Kozlik or anyone else in the ward. That I had not brought them a butt or a crust of bread or even a little kasha. Kozlik had waited several hours in the dark corridor. So I'm so moved by the quality of this story and the man telling it. Because even when he experiences this shame, it's not a shame born of self-pity. In fact, I think it's much closer to a kind of purification. Purification in the sense that we chant purification in our sutras in the morning. All the harm and suffering ever created by me since of old, I now confess openly and fully. Because this is a kind of confession of Shalamov's. And by confessing without self-pity, he seamlessly unites himself with Kozlik, with the patients in the ward, with the doctor even, and certainly with himself. All of these dimensions are healed back together by this acknowledgement of shame. And it's interesting that he moves from even the nauseatingly sweet smoke to the nauseatingly sour taste of shame. But he takes both of them in his stride. And I like that his shame it's not held at bay. He doesn't try to explain it away. He doesn't try to justify himself. He could easily have justified himself, I feel, in taking that food and drink. But he doesn't even make that move. And he doesn't make the inverse move of trying to exaggerate his shame, which possibly all of us have indulged in our time. There's something about the quality of the suffering willingly borne, the joys and the sufferings willingly borne, whatever is encountered, willingly borne, and deeply felt. It's something about that I love in Shalamov and his writing. Because if I'm very reluctant. I don't want to try and do something as stupid as trying to define evil, but I think it's fair to say that if it comes from anywhere, it comes from and is powered by a sense of separation. A sense of separation from what is, and then perhaps even an ingrained insistence upon that separation. Because how else could the world and the earth be so abused if we did somehow think that we were separate from it? So if we characterise tentatively, I suppose, evil as a blindness to shared life, then goodness could be a recognition and embrace of shared life. Because we can recognise the good in whatever we recognise as being ourselves, being our true selves, is the good. And I might have to collude with the Russians a little bit longer. My wife has been reading Anna Karenina, something I've always promised myself to do but haven't ever done. It's next to War and Peace, which I have read a bit of, but I haven't read it all. But Kirsty's been reading it, my wife, and she runs in every morning over breakfast to tell me about the latest excitement that's been happening. So I've had the kind of audio book over making lunches for kids and packing bags. And the other day she came bounding in because she wanted to tell me about Levin, who's Anna's lover, who survives Anna, spoiler alert. And Levin has just had this interesting awakening, this interesting realisation towards the end of the book. And he has it in this kind of conversation with one of the farmhands who just offhandedly says, "Oh, Levin, you're a good person." And Levin does this sort of double take, saying, What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean I'm a good person? He says, "Well, you don't live just for the belly, you live for the soul." And something about this spins Levin around. And all he can say is, yes, goodbye. And he's off. And Tolstoy tells us, he says, Levin went out in big strides along the main road. I love that it's the main road, our royal road. He went in big strides along the main road, listening not so much to his thoughts, he still couldn't sort them out, as to the nature of his soul, which he had never experienced before. He felt something new in his soul and delightedly probed the new thing, not knowing what it was. And of course, this not knowing is what's key here. So his thoughts keep bumbling along. He is Levin after all, this idealistic, driven human being. But he no longer knows anything about his thoughts. And you get the real sense in this abandon as he strides down this road that he no longer has a fixed sense of himself. He doesn't know who his self is anymore. And far from this not knowing being a destabilising thing or something that throws him off balance or anything like that, he finds that it's the most fundamental thing that he's ever experienced. This is what he says. I and all people have only one firm, unquestionable and clear knowledge, and this knowledge cannot be explained by reason. It is outside it and has no causes and can have no consequences. If the good has a cause, it is no longer good. If it has a consequence, it is also not the good. Therefore, the good is outside the chain of cause and effect. And I know it. And we all know it. I think Levin is touching what we might call the empty equality of our world here. He's touching the shared moment that we have. And when we realise that there is only this shared moment, what could we possibly call it but good? And this is the challenge behind Yun Men's famous "every day is a good day," which many of us will have heard. I remember reading about Robert Aitken being challenged, somebody saying, could we say every day is a bad day with equality? And he said no. He said no. He said all beings by nature are Buddha, not all beings by nature are Mara. So knowing that this moment is all we have, is the good, can we then begin to appreciate the goodness of muddled thoughts, of ailments, of searing griefs, of confusion, distress? Can we resist trying to label these things, trying to know them, and open up to what is actually nameless, beyond our knowing? I think this is beautifully expressed in a haiku by Isa, and I have to include a haiku because there's so many haiku junkies here in the in the Tasmanian group. And this is a beautiful haiku from Isa, which I think sums up this quality of this good. And here's the haiku. He just says, "A good world. The dewdrops fall by ones, by twos." I hope you can hear the deep, deep not knowing at play here. I can just imagine him standing on a veranda with Eve, with the little drops falling down, the little dewdrops. Just so, like that. And just marvelling, just enjoying them, just as they are. Nothing added, nothing taken away. But clearly the poem isn't just about literal dewdrops. It's about all our fleeting fears and joys and acquaintances and loves and hopes. everything falls. Because falling is the law. Falling is the Dharma. Everything, our losses, our heartbreaks, you name it, it falls. So can we take refuge in just this falling, in the very nature of falling? A good world, the dewdrops fall. By ones, by twos. I love this, by ones, by twos. It's got an echo of the 2 or 3 hills and a cloud. Because when we fall back into our natural, seamless self, can we really find lines between things? Can we really find a separation between us and the other, self and other? Or is it just by ones, by twos? Can't say, can't say. I think this is what we all experience actually in our rounds of deep meditation in Zazen here at Sesshin. We fall, we take the backward step, we fall back into our most natural and seamless and at ease state of mind. Admitting to this falling is what saves us and the many beings. And I think this is a good that we can appreciate being beyond good or bad. This is not about saying better or worse. This is the fundamental good of our world, a good world, one worth protecting. And that's why whatever it is that we are experiencing is where we take our refuge. Where else could we take our refuge? There's no other place to go. This is what we have. It is what we are, and it is where we dwell. So this is where we are saved. And when we save ourselves, touch our genuine, true, seamless self, we do save the many beings. It's interesting, though, that the governor, having been given the priest's words of, as for doing evil, avoid it, as for the good, practice sharing it. Practice sharing it by admitting to it. He still almost reverts to type. He goes back to being the governor all of a sudden. And he says, well, those lines you just told me, even a 3-year-old could say that. Well, yes, says the priest, even a 3-year-old could say it, but even an 8-year-old cannot practice it. And notice that he's not just talking about some abstract 80-year-old. He is talking about himself. And you, and me. Because practicing in the midst of precariousness, that's where we are, is, I almost don't want to say difficult, and yet it is difficult. It requires practice and ongoing attention to new, fresh. This is what we have to cultivate in our practice. That's why we practice. It's not something that we do in any static way, and that's why practice never ends. So the question really is, can we make our home in this precariousness? Just as, I want to add, just as old bird nest does in his tree, in his old pine tree, precariousness itself, the old pine tree with spreading branches. These branches of precariousness that spread into every corner of our lives. And not only spread and reach into every corner of our lives, but support, hold up every corner and dimension of our lives. And we're told that in a kind of gratitude, I think, for this teaching of Nyoke's, the governor is simply said to have bowed and departed. Perhaps there's nothing more really he has to say or can say in response to the priests. Even an 80-year-old cannot practice it. And in that same spirit, I think I will now also bow and depart. Wishing you well.